Great. Those of you at home that can now hear me, welcome as well. Many of you know some of the story of the heart condition our son Jet was born with. The quick story, when we went to one of our early ultrasounds during pregnancy, the sonographer told us, he said, I think that your baby has a transposition of the greater arteries, where the major arteries in the heart are reversed, the wrong way round. And he says, you'll have to go see a specialist about this, but it can be dealt with surgery, but it's a serious condition, and without surgery, the child will die, but surgery is there, it should be good. So we went to a specialist, a cardiovascular specialist for children. This is his forte, and he said, I think it's very unlikely that at this stage anyone can see that. He said, the baby is so small at the moment. We're talking about really detailed stuff. Like, no one can actually make this kind of diagnosis this early on, but let's have a look. He did a scan. He had a moment where he looked at a chart of a heart on a wall and he was doing these ones, and that was a little concerning that he was trying to figure that out. But he said, my diagnosis is there's no problem. I think it's almost impossible to see. It's very difficult, but I can't see a problem. We had a following checkup a while later, and when Jet was bigger, the scan showed that the original diagnosis was true. It was one of those situations, right? The surgeon said, we can't give you a 100% guarantee on this kind of surgery. We can say we've had a 100% success rate thus far, that kind of doctor talk. And it was successful, and we're very thankful. Of those two early diagnoses we got, the one that told us there was a problem and the one that told us there was no problem, one of those was much harder to hear than the other, right? One of them seemed like great news, the other one seemed like terrible news. But one of them we were thankful for looking back, and the other we aren't, right? There's something about a correct diagnosis, no matter how difficult it is to hear, is a good thing for us to hear. It's a right thing for us to hear. And I think as we do this, look at this section of the Sermon on the Mount, what Jesus is doing is saying some hard truths that are the right diagnosis. And it's hard for us to hear, but it's good for us to hear. And I think that's critical as we look at this passage here and think about what it is Jesus is saying. Because Jesus' diagnosis of the situation, he says that anyone who's not with him is not on a pathway to life, he says. In fact, the New Living Translation, I like it, but they call it a highway to hell. I think it's very funny that they've chosen those words. Like, the actual translation, the Greek, is just like they didn't have highways in Jesus' day, so it's just a pathway to destruction is the language. They've done the theological work for us to do that. I just think it's funny. Like, AC/DC song was out for many years before this translation came around. Someone has grabbed that phrase, highway to hell, and they've put it in there as a picture of what Jesus is saying. I think it's Sam Chan, he's a great preacher, evangelist, tells a story about going to an AC/DC concert, and at the end of the concert, the crowd, it was Australia Day actually, he said he went to this AC/DC concert on Australia Day, the crowd, band finishes, the crowd chants for an encore, the band comes out and they start playing Highway to Hell, and the crowd just erupts, fist pumping, cheering, singing out as loud as they can. And Sam Chan's reflection is, he says, I had this moment where I thought, I think this is the real Australian national anthem. This idea that we would say, no one's going to tell us what to do. We'll make our own decisions. We'll write our own destiny. And whatever the consequences, whatever comes, what's most important, we did it. It was our way. This is it. There's something there, I think, that we do resonate with, right? The idea of, I want to do it my way. I want to achieve in the face of the odds Whatever people tell me I can't do, I want to prove that I can do. And I think we do resonate with that. And yet Jesus says, this is the diagnosis of what happens if we are living for ourselves. Any other path is not a path to life. We've been looking at this sermon. This is the last bit of the Sermon on the Mount. In fact, next week we're going to conclude the Sermon on the Mount. So this is his second last point he kind of has here. And the big drive of the Sermon on the Mount, I would summarize it as he has called us to fiercely pursue the kingdom. Fierce faithfulness is the message of the Sermon on the Mount. And if you fiercely pursue the kingdom, it turns everything on its head. In fact, it'll turn your own heart upside down, is the message of the Sermon on the Mount. And so fiercely pursuing the kingdom means you will fiercely pursue gentleness, if you can even do that. You'll fiercely pursue humility, if you can even do that. That's what fiercely pursuing the kingdom looks like. It'll turn your life upside down and make you want to pursue generosity. Want you to fiercely pursue holy living. That's what Jesus says. And as we come to the end of this sermon, as he summarizes, this is where I think we hear Jesus wants us to land. Not in a place where we start asking the question, was that a good sermon? You know, did it engage me? Was it helpful to me? Jesus wants to draw a line in the sand and say, whatever has been said, here's where it hits. There's two roads, he says. And he's not just saying his way is the best way for you, though it is. He's not just saying his way is the only way you should live, though it is. He's not just saying his way is the actual way God intended you to live from the very beginning, though it is. The message here is any other path we might go down is not truly living. Any other path we go down is not life. That's his words. The NLT gives us that language, the gateway to life, he says. And this is his diagnosis. It's a hard word, but he says it is very narrow and the road is difficult. That's the picture we get of what Jesus is calling his followers to. Jesus is the good doctor, and this is the correct diagnosis he's giving, but it's a difficult word to hear. It's a challenge. And he goes on to say there are three scary truths that come with this. The first scary truth, and also sad truth, is that many people, in fact, he says most people, by far, are not on that narrow path to life. Most people are on the wide road, he says. I mean, that is a scary thing. It's a sad thing, but it's also a scary thing as we think about what that means for us. Because I think one of the major things we think in particularly, I guess, Western thinking at the moment, individualistic kind of drive thinking, some of it is truth is defined. This is a general thought at the moment. Truth is defined by the majority. Right? I think, and there's a part of that we resonate with, right? We would say, how do you know what's true scientifically? Well, you'd answer the question, you know, what do the most scientists say? How do you answer the question, what is true medically? Well, what do most doctors say? I mean, this is one of the major tensions that came out of COVID, right? If the majority says it, is it true? And we found some of it not to be true as we took that journey. Some of it we learnt more along the way. You know, if the majority dentists say it's Colgate, it's Colgate. I mean, they can't show their face, but majority of them say it. If the majority say it, is it true? Some of that we would say, yes, that is helpful. But let me say, that is helpful as we're seeking truth. As we're seeking truth and we say lots of people genuinely seeking truth, maybe gathering the most data we can is helpful. But the majority don't create truth. Right? That doesn't make sense. Something isn't just true because the majority believe it. And so as we think about the scientific world and discoveries are made, there are places where we would say we've discovered what we seem to think is true. But just because it's been discovered or concluded by the majority isn't the thing that makes it true. And this is what Jesus says here. In fact, he says the scary thing is the majority are actually going to be wrong in this one. I saw a meme 2 weeks ago, and the meme was a picture of a church. I assume it was a real photo of a church. They had a sign out the front, lots of great humorous signs of churches. This one simply said, it said, many people believing something doesn't make it true. That was the picture on the thing. The title on the meme was, how ironic. Right? How ironic that a church would say many people believing something doesn't actually make it true. And the comment feed was just these comments just saying they are so blind, they have no idea, how ridiculous. And I just thought, is this an irony inside an irony or something like that? Like, here's a large group of people declaring their truth is the truth and predominantly seemingly built on the fact because many of them believe it, but laughing at another group that many believe something else. And we're left with, how do we decide what's truth? We know it can't be just because the majority believe it. That's not going to create truth. Truth is going to be truth. And we need to seek truth. Jesus says if you are a follower of him, if you are on his path, you're going to be in opposition often to some of the mainstream truth. Most of all, most importantly, of the truth about him. His words, only a few ever find it. Verse 14. That is quite a sad thing to process and think about. And it's also a scary thing to think about as we try to navigate truth ourselves and think about and find and discover truth ourselves. It is a difficult thing to think. There will be times where we will go against mainstream thinking. It's a scary truth. Many people are on the wide road. A second scary truth is that false leaders on this wide road will be persuasive. Well, it's interesting, and you see this all the way through the Sermon on the Mount. When Jesus wants to talk about evil, he doesn't kind of list the people we would put at that top of the list, right? Jesus doesn't say, what you'll see on this wide road is you'll see the prostitutes and the pimps and the thieves, and what you'll see is the casinos and the bright lights of Las Vegas. That's the gates of the wide road. That's not the picture he gets. Here's the picture he gives us. How does he describe the leaders that are going to be on this wide road? He says, disguised as harmless sheep. So when Jesus looks to the wide road, he's not seeing Las Vegas. He's seeing what looks like from a distance sheep. What that means is leaders that are persuading people to thought processes that align with this wide road will look like they're doing it in the name of love. What they're saying will appear like it's loving things. And even as we reflect on the Sermon on the Mount, we can see some of those examples that Jesus already pulled for us. That is the lie that says your value will be found in your success. Jesus says your value won't be found in your success, and you shouldn't be pursuing that as your core value. Or that your financial security will be the solution to your worries. Jesus says financial solution won't be the solution to your worries, because even your finances at some point will come to an end when this life ends. Or that kind of religious self-righteousness will make you right with God. If you just do the right things and say the right things, you'll be right with God. Jesus says he is the only way to be made right with God. That is the offer, putting genuine trust in him. So the scary thing is that the wide road is going to be full of people that will look like, act like, they're living a life of love, sharing a message of love. They will look and act like sheep, Jesus says. Now he tells us we can see through some of their actions the fruit of what they're doing. We should be able to diagnose the fruit of what they're doing and see that that's not true. But nonetheless, he's warning us because it's clearly going to be persuasive. It's clearly going to be a challenge for us that we need to examine these things and look at their fruit. It is, and as we think about Life Group Sunday, it is one of the things we say is really helpful about being in a group together, because we wrestle with some of these things that often come to us as loving lifestyles that actually are really bad for us, that actually are poison. And that is something we get to do shoulder to shoulder in a circle, on lounges or around a table or beanbags. That's something we get to do in life, is wrestle with those things together. Because the scary thing is, these false teachers, these false leaders are going to be persuasive and seem like harmless sheep. That's scary thing number 2, but I think scary thing number 3, Jesus says, is the scariest of all. That is, he says false followers will travel this wide road. This is his words. They are heavy words for us to hear. He says, "Not everyone who calls out to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven." He is saying that even some who have declared their allegiance to Jesus actually are not on his road. It makes me think of like the kind of cartoon picture of when a cartoon sees a mirage in a desert, like that idea, the classic, like the oasis comes out of nowhere and they run, and like the old Disney style dive into the sand, but it's water and they're swimming, but then the water disappears and they're actually blowing like sand out their mouth. And what happens classically in that story is suddenly they get a taste of the grit of sand that they've taken a mouthful of, and they start spitting it on the ground, and they recognize, oh, this is actually not water, this is sand. What Jesus says here is, some will never taste that grit of sand. Some will continue with it in their mouth, living in a desert, thinking it's an oasis. That is an incredibly scary thing for us to hear. He says 2 things are not good enough. First of all, it's not good enough just to have a public declaration of him. It's not good enough just to say, Jesus is my Lord, and just say it. The second thing, and maybe even scarier, he says not good enough just to have a demonstration of faith. To not just act like Jesus is your Lord is enough. In fact, he says it in verse 22. He says, these people will say, we prophesied in your name and cast out demons in your name and performed many miracles in your name. And he says he'll say to them, I never knew you. It's a scary thought if you are coming to church because you think that is the thing that's going to make you right with God. Jesus says, only active trust in him. It's a scary thought if you're calling yourself a Christian, doing Christian things because you think they will make you right with God. Jesus says, only active trust in him. Active trust in Jesus results, he says, in fruit of obedience. But the thing that we put our faith in is not in our religious faith, but the thing we put our faith in is Jesus. I think throughout history of the things that kind of have caused that problem for people, I mean, a classic thing in the Anglican church has been infant baptism, people feeling like I was baptised as a child, or I'm going to get my child baptised so that they will be right with God. And that is not accurate at all. That is not something that makes us right with God. That is an expression of God's work in us, not the thing that makes us right with him. Or this morning we're going to have communion together. And often communion people have thought that as long as I get to church and I have my communion every Sunday, that's, renewing me for another week, making me right with God once again. That's not what we take communion for, not to make us right with God, but to remind us of the work that he has already done in us and for us. And so we come to 2 things we want to think about. The first one is, there is a call here for us to put our active trust in Jesus. That if you are someone who feels like you have been doing the Christian things, saying the Christian things, the call Jesus says is that's not what it's about. It's about putting our active trust in him. Paul, when he writes to the church in Rome, Romans 10:9, Paul says it like this. He says, if you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord, right? Jesus says that's not enough, but Paul adds to that. He says, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. There is a connection that needs to happen between our mouth, our actions, and our heart, and it needs to be genuine, that we genuinely put our trust in Jesus. I remember my own testimony. I grew up in a Christian home. I heard about Jesus from a very young age, but I remember, I don't know what age I was, I remember lying in bed at night, a number of nights, and I had two questions. The first one was, if I close my mouth when I fall asleep and I get a blocked nose, will I die? It's an important question. Answer, always fall asleep with your mouth open. I still snore to this day. Number two, if I die, will I go to heaven? And what I did for a number of nights, I remember as a young child, is just said, no, if I put my trust in Jesus, then I go to heaven. That's what I've been taught. So I was like, yeah, but what if I didn't? What if my memory of doing that in the past was actually not a thing? What if I'm not putting my trust in Jesus? And so a number of nights, I think I went to sleep saying, Jesus, just in case I didn't before, let you know I still trust you. Please don't let my nose get blocked. I hit a moment in those nights. I clearly remember saying, I just need to, this is not something I need to keep doing. I just need to remember that I did it. And so I remember one night saying, this is it, Jesus. If I forgot last time, this one, no more. I trust you. There needs to be, not just with our words, but it needs to be genuine in our hearts. And then Jesus says, that's it. That's what he offers his salvation. And that will result in the works of salvation. And so the first one is a call to you to say, if that's you, then the answer is put your trust in Jesus. Maybe he's calling you to do that today. Let me say the second thing, and that is for those that do trust Jesus but live with that doubt. What if I didn't? What if it's not genuine? What about the times I put my trust in him, but I also still live selfishly, still do things I shouldn't do? There needs to be encouragement for us there that Jesus does say that active trust in him is what our salvation relies on. And I want to say it is okay to have that question, and maybe even healthy for you to have that question. In fact, to ignore that question and not answer that question, am I really trusting Jesus? To just ignore that question entirely, I think is unhealthy. You need to be sure that you are actively trusting Jesus, and with that, we live with doubt. Alongside our faith. I think a great example of that, and I really love this story, you might remember, it's the end of Matthew, Jesus' ascension. So after he has died and risen again, he spends some time with his disciples. Matthew chapter 28, he goes up on a mountain with them. And these are guys that have walked with him, they've watched his miracles, they've seen him die, and now they're standing with him on a mountain. And this is what it says, Matthew 28. They worshipped him, and some doubted. Like every time I read it, I think it's just like a crazy thing. First of all, it's a crazy thing that doubt is there at all. Like he's standing in front of them. But also, the way it is written, the way Matthew tells us, is not some worshipped and some doubted. It says, and they worshipped, group, but some doubted. It seems like for some, both worship and doubt coexist at that same moment. Even that incredible moment that they're standing with Jesus. And I think it's a real encouragement to us that worship and doubt can coexist. And that it's okay, even, I mean, if those guys can stand right before Jesus and still have their doubts, of course we can wrestle with doubt. The pastor, Jamin Roller, says it like this. He says, the incredible thing is God is glorified in our worship and at the same time loves us in our doubt. And that is part of what it means in following Jesus. That doubt and worship coexist and will continue to coexist until Jesus returns. And all of us here will have that at different levels. I had a lecturer who gave a lecture on doubt, and he opened it with, I don't know why I'm lecturing on this. I'm a pretty black and white guy. I just never doubt. Once I made a decision, I made a decision. I think it was a bad way to start his lecture. But there are some that are in that space, and there's others of us that really wrestle with doubt. Jesus is enough for our doubt. He says, bring our doubt to him. The truth he wants us to know is those who put their active trust in him are saved in him. So I want to do a bit of a transition here. I mentioned it before. We're going to take communion together. And in light of this, I want us to take communion with a real understanding of what that is. That this isn't something we do to achieve rightness with God and make ourselves saved. This is something we do that reflects on what it is he has done. We'll talk about it in a moment, but there's very tangible imagery there, exactly focusing on what it is Jesus has done.